So happy to see some smiling faces in the audience. It's, when we did these on Zoom, it's hard to talk to an empty room and just speak to a camera. So it's really great to have people in the audience again. The clock on the wall over here is a little bit fast. My phone says it's 9:01. So we're going to get started, and those who are still coming in can continue to get their breakfast and find a seat. And welcome to those who are on Zoom also. We're happy to also be able to offer that option so that those who need to be at a distance or aren't able to come in can also get the information. So I'm Sandy Vandenberg. I'm Director of Plan Giving in the Foundation Office at Torrance Memorial. And we're happy to be able to provide these educational seminars in partnership with our Professional Advisory Council. They are a volunteer group of estate planning attorneys, financial planners, CPAs, fiduciaries, life care managers who are involved with estate planning, and they want to help educate the community about estate and tax planning and charitable giving and all of those great things. So we're pleased to be able to bring this series. We started back in May in person again since COVID, and it's great to be back in person. And I want to give a shout out to our media services staff, Mitchell. He's in the control booth in the back, handling the details of the Zoom and helping us out with that. So the series is called Taking Care of Your Financial Health. And so we bring a variety of different topics to you through that. A couple housekeeping items. If you have a cell phone with you, if you would please put it on the silent mode so that it doesn't interrupt our presentation. The restrooms are through the door and to the right over there as you exit in the back. And you've got a little red ticket for door prizes that will be given away at the end of the seminar. And we're appreciative of one of our PAC members, Maureen Dearden, who has donated those to help with that little perk for you coming to hear and learn. So you should have received handouts as you came in. Also, the handout, an evaluation form, and the flyer for the seminar we have coming up in September. We do pay attention to what you put on those evaluation forms, so we do appreciate you taking a minute at the end of the seminar to complete that and turn that in. And it's also a great way to get your email address on our distribution list. We send out an email every month called Upcoming Events and Lectures. And it goes out usually the end of the month, and it lets you know what's happening at Torrance Memorial for the next month. So our Miracle of Living lectures are on there. The Medicare 101 lectures are on there. And in fact, our next Miracle of Living lecture will be on July 19, and it's on sleep. So it's called Lessons from the Sleep Docs, and it'll be right here in this spot on Wednesday, July 19. It's at 5:30, we'll have a resource fair available, and the lecture starts at 6:30, and there is a Zoom option for that as well, for those who are preferring Zoom. And then our Medicare 101 series is put on by our Torrance Memorial IPA. They do that once a month on the last Wednesday of the month. So the next one coming up is on July 26th. That is also done via Zoom. It's not in person, it's only on Zoom right now. And that starts at 6:30. So you can find information about that on our website or email me and I can send that information too. We often get requests for the Medicare information, but they do such a great job of it. I always point people in that direction. So we are going to hold the questions till the end of the seminar. And so if you see the little index cards are on the table, so throughout the seminar, if you have a question, just write it down and we'll collect those at the end. And Sylvia and Larry will answer those as best they can. And so if you can write clearly, that's helpful. For those of you on Zoom, there's a chat feature at the bottom of your screen, kind of in the middle. You can submit your questions through chat and we will include those at the end. So I'm always curious how many people are here for the first time attending the seminar. Oh, that's great. I'm so glad that the word continues to get out and that you're joining us for this. I always like to give a little bit of a highlight of what's happening at Torrance Memorial, and right now we're excited to be building out a new interventional radiology suite. We were fortunate to get a generous donation from the Terpangian family for $5.1 million, which is about what it costs to build out this space. This equipment is the major portion of that expense. But interventional radiology is a way to use advanced medical imaging for the minimally invasive kinds of procedures. So somebody who has a stroke and has a blood clot in their head, they can go in and they can retrieve that blood clot using the interventional radiology technology. And this is called a biplane imaging. And you see it has the, find my little pointer here. This is the monitor, the surgeon, the doctor will be watching, and the patient lies right here. And I don't know how all the rest of that works, but it's pretty amazing what the technology is to provide that detail of using two rotating cameras. They can identify exactly the spot that needs the treatment. And it's used for brain aneurysms, blood clots, strokes, GI bleeding from ulcers, diverticulitis or trauma. Even in cancer, there are tumors in the liver, kidneys, bones, soft tissues. They can be destroyed using this technology. So it's very effective in this new equipment. We're already doing this work at Torrance Memorial, doing these procedures. But this one is the latest in the technology, and it will allow us to do even more advanced type of things. Of procedures. So it's very exciting to see how that can be done. I mentioned I'm director of plan giving. So plan giving is what you plan for the future, and your estate plan, and there are different tools that can be used. This slide shows like the most common one that people know is to leave a bequest, to name Torrance Memorial in your estate plan for a gift after you're gone. Charitable gift annuities and remainder trusts are income producing, so you put an asset into that tool and then you'll receive income for the rest of your life. Once you're gone, the remainder of that would come to Torrance Memorial. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about the IRA beneficiary opportunity. If you have an IRA or 401k and you donate and your heirs, your family, or a person inherits that, they are going to pay taxes on that money, and they're going to need to take it out within 10 years. So that will impact their income tax reporting. And if it's given to Torrance Memorial, no tax has to be paid. So you can use that if you want to leave something to us. You can name us as a beneficiary of your IRA or your 401k, and use other assets to give your children, and so they don't have to pay the taxes on it. So it's a wonderful way to support your favorite charity, which I hope is Torrance Memorial. And it's also important that you let us know, because sometimes they don't notify the beneficiaries right away. And so if we know about this, then after you're gone, we're able to follow up on it and claim that gift. Torrance Memorial also has a Heritage Society. Our Heritage Society is a group of folks who have included us in their estate plan. We like to appreciate you once a year and appreciate you and get to know you while you're with us. So if you have included us in your estate plan, please let me know. I'd like to include you in the Heritage Society. And we have our annual appreciation lunch coming up the middle of this month. So we would like to be able to include you in that. We have a website here. It's listed at the top. It has a lot of great resources about estate planning and plan giving. One of the things that is very helpful is this estate planning kit, and it can be downloaded from the website. And if you go to that website at the top there and click on the bequest or leaving a gift in your will or trust, I think might be what the heading is, And at the bottom of that page, you'll find the spot where you can download this. The record book is a spot where you can put all of your assets together in one place. And it's very useful and will be helpful to those who follow behind you so that they will also be able to make it, and it makes it easier to settle your estate. We have some financial health articles are listed on the bottom. You see this website here on the bottom, and that is also where we'll post the recording of this seminar. And I'll send an email to everybody whose email address I have on our RSVP list so that you have the link and we'll know when it's posted there. We are a nonprofit hospital. We do depend on the community a lot to help support for the charity care and for all the many things that go on here. So I always like to include this in a way for you to donate. And we appreciate all of the support. So now we're going to get to the meat of this seminar while you're here. And I'd like to introduce one of the co-chairs of our Professional Advisory Council, Karen Pryor. She shares that role with Larry, who's presenting, so she'll introduce him. But Karen is a certified reverse mortgage professional with Mutual of Omaha Reverse Mortgage Division, and she's going to introduce our speakers.
Thanks, Sandy. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for starting your weekend off by getting some education. Before I start with our introductions, I would like to read our disclosure. This material is for general information only and is not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine what is appropriate for you, please consult qualified professionals. If I may ask the rest of our PAC members to come up to the front here so we can introduce you. We'll start off with Eric Harris. Eric is an attorney at the law offices of Hoffer and Harris in the Riviera Village section of Redondo Beach. Eric, give us a wave. Betty Bergman. Betty is an attorney and principal shareholder of the law firm Peninsula Law, located here in Torrance. Betty. And we also have Tom Schlapatha. Tom is a certified financial planner with Morgan Stanley here in Torrance. Thank you for being here this morning. Today's workshop is on long-term care options, planning, and insurance. Our speakers today, Sylvia Thompson, Life Care Manager. Sylvia Thompson is a certified aging life care manager providing care management and consultant services through her company, Holistic Family Solutions. She also provides case management services for disabled adults through Westside Regional Center. Sylvia's background in mental health and special needs gives her the insight to help family members find solutions for their long-term care needs. In 1993, Sylvia worked alongside Mother Teresa and the Sisters of Charity in Calcutta, India. Well done, you. Larry Takahashi, certified financial planner and also my PAC co-chair. Larry Takahashi is an independent financial advisor with Larry Takahashi Financial Services in Torrance. Larry is a certified financial planner, an accredited investment fiduciary, and a retirement income certified professional. Larry's primary focus is to help clients build strategies for a successful retirement, including creating an effective retirement income plan and identifying ways to minimize the impact of taxes during their retirement and on their estate. Larry also teaches retirement planning courses at El Camino College and Torrance Adult School. Welcome, both of you. Well, okay. Nope, that one. There you go.
Oh, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I was telling Sandy and Larry and the folks here that I'm sitting today. I was visiting my aunt and my uncle in Arizona, and my uncle, can you hear me okay? All right, oh, there we go. I hear it now, okay. So I was in Arizona visiting my aunt and my uncle, and my uncle and I were in the car, he was driving, and I've been trying to get my uncle and my aunt to move into a community for a while. My uncle acts as primary caregiver to my aunt who has dementia, and he is really burning out. And we were driving, and he made a left turn, an unsafe left turn, and we got hit. And so I'm limping. So that's why I'm trying to stay sitting a little bit more today. But I thought, well, it's a good example to use when it's too late, right? When you're not planning ahead and when you're not taking action early enough. Now he's going to lose his license, and we're heading in that direction. But it's been a challenge for him. He's struggling with having to give up a certain lifestyle. So what we're going to talk about today is all the different things that encompass long-term care. We're going to talk a little bit about, let's see. We're going to talk a little bit about labor laws, what you need to know, what your liabilities are when you're hiring in home care, et cetera. We're going to look at what there is besides home care, what are the other options, so that you can see really what you can choose from. A lot of times people think that if you either have a caregiver in the home or you go into a nursing home, and that is not the case. Thankfully, all you baby boomers out there have made the expectations, you've raised the bar. And so there are really wonderful places that people can live that aren't that nursing home feeling. And so we'll talk more about that. And then Larry's going to talk about long-term care insurance. Okay, so there is a wide range of fees when we talked about home care, because it really is going to be dependent on what's covered. There are a lot of agencies out there that are still calling themselves home care agencies, but they're not licensed for home care in this state. In California, to be licensed to provide home care in the state, you have to provide, you all have to take care of all the employment liability. So the taxes, the workers' comp insurance, that agency is responsible for those things. That means that they can become licensed in the state of California. If they're not going to provide the liability, the workers' comp insurance, they're not going to take care of the taxes and all the employment liabilities, they don't get to have a license in the state. So that's the first thing, is asking someone, do they have a home care organization, HCO number? If they have an HCO number, then you know they're doing everything legally. So there are a lot of changes that are happening in home care constantly. Every year there's a new minimum wage. There are things that if you're deciding to hire somebody individually on your own, privately hire them, there's a lot you have to consider. I actually will tell people, if you have assets to protect, you really have no business hiring privately. There are way too many liabilities if you have assets to protect. If you have assets to protect, like a house or a business or anything like that, you need to get you really ought to have an agency involved. They will shoulder the liability. So if a caregiver wants to sue, they're not going to sue you, they're going to sue the agency. They're going to, workers' comp policy, the workers' comp injury, the agency has to take care of that. So again, if it may mean you're paying more for home care services because you're using a full service agency. However, if you have something to protect, it's worthwhile. So another thing to understand is the way things have changed in California. So up there you'll see in California, it's currently $15.96 an hour in LA County. If you're in Los Angeles City, it's $16.04 per hour. That's minimum wage. That's what the caregiver has to make. That doesn't include taxes, workers' comp insurance, doesn't include anything else. That's what they need to make. And somebody has to be the employer. So if it's not an agency, that would be the person who hires them. You are then bound by all those liabilities. Depending on what's needed, In LA County, the cost for using an agency is anywhere between $32 to $40 an hour. That's all inclusive. That takes care of all the liability you don't have to worry about. But as you can see, that's quite costly. And that might work for 5 or 6 hours a day, but when you start needing something like 24/7, it's going to be not possible for a lot of people to do that. So I'm going to go over this kind of briefly so we can get to some other options. So for the employer model agency, they are going to take care of paying the caregivers, tracking the hours, the sick days, the overtime. They're going to withhold taxes. They're going to pay the Social Security, workers' comp liability. They are required, if they have that HCO number I mentioned, they're required to have professional liability, bonding, and workers' comp. They would be responsible for medical care and disability compensation and lost wages or any work-related injuries for the caregivers. Keep in mind, when caregivers, one of the biggest workers' comp injury for a caregiver is a back injury. And a lot of people say, well, I'll just make sure I pay their doctor bills. The problem is it's not just the doctor bills. So a workers' comp case, if somebody hurts their back, yes, there's the doctor visit, but then there's probably up to 6 months where they're not able to work. So you would have to pay them lost wages as well. So workers' comp policy is really important. And so that's why these agencies would make sure that that would be covered. Agencies would also supervise the caregiver, schedule any changes. They'd make sure that there was a backup if that person got sick. They would investigate any issues. They screen the caregivers. If you have an HCO number, all the caregivers have to be fingerprinted through the Department of Justice. And it's actually one of the most, it's a lifetime background check. It's one of the most thorough background checks. I think it's even more thorough than the police department. But it's a lifetime background check that they do in the state of California. So screening, they screen the caregivers, they perform reference checks, background checks, and some will even do drug screening. So these are, again, all the things that you're going to want done for somebody who's coming into a home of somebody who's vulnerable, right? Drug screening, TB screening, all of those things. I love this cartoon because it's the wolf. I actually really don't say that much on the screen. I just really like that cartoon. All right, I'm going to do this. I think this might make more sense if I pull this out. There we go. I think that's better. All right, so the advantages of employer models. So they're going to screen, they're going to check, they're responsible for everything. They handle the caregiver management. We're going to talk more about that. And they have access to caregivers, so they can do backup. So what happens if somebody's sick? So this became a real issue during COVID, is somebody got sick or they tested positive for COVID, and then you're out a caregiver. If you don't have an agency on board, who's going to provide you a backup? Now that's fine if you're somebody who just has a caregiver come a few days a week to help you with shopping or running errands or doctor's appointments. But if you need somebody to help you get out of bed or to make sure that you're getting a shower or meal preparation or something like that, what do you do if your caregiver doesn't show up? That's another reason why using an agency is so important, to have that backup. All right, so another thing I hear a lot is people say, well, the caregiver says she's an independent contractor and she doesn't, so she's going to take care of the taxes herself. Well, that's fine, but the caregiver's not the one that's going to get in trouble. You are. Caregivers are not considered independent. They don't meet the criteria to be an independent contractor. And that was actually solidified in 2018 with a California Supreme Court decision that determined that the criteria for a independent contractor is that the worker is free from the control and direction of the employer. So that means if the caregiver is an independent contractor, that means she comes, and if she's helping you take a bath, she gets to use whatever soap she wants to use. Or if she's showing up, and she can come whenever she wants, right? So I'll give you an example. An independent contractor is like a plumber. You know how the plumber tells you, oh, I'll be there between 12 and 5 on Wednesday, and then you have to wait for the plumber to get there? The plumber brings his own tools, and I don't stand there and tell the plumber how to do his job. That's an independent contractor. A caregiver is told what to do by the family or by the individual. The caregiver is supposed to show up at a certain time, right? Tell them to show up at 8 o'clock. They have to be there at 8. And they use either the vacuum cleaner or the shower gel or the groceries, whatever they're helping with, they use the equipment or the materials that they get from the client. They don't bring their own tools. So if somebody's asking to be a 1099 employee, or they'll take care of it themselves, they're not legally allowed to do that. And again, California is probably the most employee-friendly state, so they won't do much to penalize the individual worker, but they will penalize the employer, and that would be you. So when hiring privately, these are the things you're responsible for: a W-2 form, employment eligibility verification, which is your I-9 form, Social Security, federal unemployment tax. These are all the things. Workers' compensation, you'll see, is there, right? Complying with state, federal statutes governing the wages, hours, and working conditions of employees. Now, you can get a payroll company to help you with that. But you need to make sure it's a payroll company who knows specifically the business that you're in, which is home care, because there are very specific rules with the wage and hour rules in California. Good example, Betty White, our beloved Betty White. Back in, I want to say 2017, Betty White was sued by her household employee who had been with her for 20-some years for wage and hour infractions. Missed breaks, not paying overtime. There were a few other things. It got settled out of court, so we have no idea what the settlement was. That was all hush-hush. But if they can sue Betty White, they can certainly sue any one of us. So, and that was a wage and hour infraction that they were, and overtime issues that they were fighting for. So, if you're hiring privately, you're going to have to report wages when starting, and then quarterly to the state of California. You're going to have to pay employers' Social Security contribution, withhold the Social Security, withhold the employee's Social Security contribution. This makes my head spin. Withhold state disability insurance contribution, pay unemployment insurance, provide workers' compensation coverage. Okay, so those are all the things that you're going to have to do for yourself if you're hiring privately. And keeps going, continued. So all these other things, right? Keep records of the hours worked, make sure you're paying overtime, calculate appropriate overtime pay. If it's more than 9 hours per, if somebody is in your home for more than 9 hours, they automatically have to be paid overtime, even if they're sleeping. So that was the big thing about a live-in caregiver. If you have a live-in caregiver by law, you have to pay them for the 9 hours regular time and then 15 hours of overtime every day. Yeah, it's kind of nuts. That's California. Even if they're sleeping. So most people don't want a live-in caregiver because on principle, they don't want to pay someone time and a half to sleep. I can totally understand that. So you have to make sure all the wage orders rules are followed per the classification. There's very specific classifications. How much housekeeping are they doing? It has to be below a certain number, and then they're considered a caregiver. And then it goes. You have to make sure you're doing everything by the books. And then I put down obey housing laws because there's been a big surge these days in people squatting, like all over the country. You can go on YouTube and see people who are squatting and how they're trying to get squatters out of houses. It happens actually with caregiving. If you have somebody that you've hired privately and they're living there and you've given them room and board in exchange for, you have to then watch, how do you get them out of the house? How does your heir get them out of the house when you die, right? So something to be looking at is preventing, a situation where squatting can happen. And also there are laws as to, in exchange for, there is a law that tells how much, and one of the attorneys might be able to chime in, but how much you're allowed to use in exchange for rent. You can't pay somebody a small stipend and say the rest is covered by your room and board is the rest of your pay. There's only a portion of somebody's salary that can be considered room and board. And I don't know what that amount is, but that would be someone you would want to talk to, an employment attorney. That's the other thing, is if you're going to start employing caregivers, I would highly recommend you speak to an employment attorney who understands what all is entailed, because there are a lot of ways you can get tripped up. And just your ignorance is not an excuse for the law. You will be penalized. Okay, caregiver management. So the other thing is, and this there's no way to really take care of this unless you're using an agency, is if you're doing the caregiver management, it in and of itself is a full-time job. If you have round-the-clock care, or you have several caregivers, you have to figure out how they work as a team. You have to set up systems so that they can communicate with each other. You have to look at not just the sort of day-to-day, but bigger issues in terms of vacation time, and it is a lot of supervision, caregiver supervision that's needed. Now, an agency will do that for you. The other thing is making sure that they're staying current with their education and training, making sure that they do their California registry renewal, trying to minimize overtime, making sure that you're not paying a lot of money in overtime because somebody keeps calling off sick and somebody always steps in, but you're paying them 60 hours of overtime. Also, someone who's going to communicate what the expectations are. It's not an appropriate expectation for the individual who's receiving care to dictate terms, because when you are dependent on someone to help you, it makes it an uncomfortable situation to give them constructive criticism. You might be worried that if you tell them that you don't like the way they're doing something, maybe they'll be angry and retaliate, right? So it can be an uncomfortable situation to supervise your own caregiver. So there should always be an outside person to help with that. An adult son or daughter can do it, certainly, but you want that sort of extra set of eyes. Like I said, it is a full-time job, documenting services, timekeeping, mileage, caregiver expenses. If you have long-term care insurance, you have to actually document. Well, actually, I think most long-term care policies won't let you hire privately anymore. Let's see, what else? Payroll, sick time, all of that. So the other thing is that we're not even talking about is the other dangers of hiring privately. Like, what happens if somebody has dementia and is either striking the caregiver or maybe making sexual advances towards the caregiver because the behavior is something that's coming out of the dementia, it's a dementia behavior. Those are harassment charges, right? So that they can be charged with harassment. Those things are handled by an agency by having the insurance to protect, so that if a client does something that is untoward towards the caregiver, they manage that. If you're hiring privately and you have somebody that strikes a caregiver and they're injured, that, you know, who is then responsible? It's going to be the client and the client's family. Again, if you have assets to protect, I always advise people go through an agency. I mean, there's so many. There's wrongful termination. If you don't like what a caregiver is doing and you fire them, can they sue you for wrongful termination? It's California. They can sue you for anything they want. Whether or not they're going to win, you're still going to have to get an attorney, right? So there are a lot of reasons to use an agency. So now that I threw all that at you, we're going to talk about some other options, because truly, if you need somebody a few hours a week, maybe 20 hours a week, that's one thing. But when you start getting to a point where you need 24/7, if you need that, most people cannot afford that right now. You're talking about pretty much the 1% in this country can afford, because if you think about it, you're paying for somebody's salary, right? You're paying their entire salary and several people's if you're doing 24/7. So for needing that kind of care, it would be important to look at what other options are out there. And that's what we're going to look at now. And I encourage people to, I always encourage people to look at a threshold. So in your mind, right? So, and do it now. I've already done it. If I need somebody to come into my home 3 times a week, I could see having a caregiver do that. But if I start needing somebody 8 to 10 hours a day, then it's time for me to move. That's no longer an appropriate setting for me. That's my life. That's my decision, right? So think about what's important to you. I can't tell you how many times I go into someone's home and they say, well, you're not getting me out until you're going to get me out of here feet first. Well, that's great. So are you going to sacrifice your quality of life to stay in a house that you may not even remember as your house anymore? So that's the conversation I like to have with people. Okay, when would be an okay time to move? Because frankly, most of us are going to have to move out of our home. So what would it take? What would it be? Would it be, I've had some people who, once they get diagnosed with dementia, say, you know, I want to stay in this home as long as I remember it's where I raised my children. That's a fair threshold, right? I want to live in this home until financially, I'm not going to be able to do more than 8 hours a day because of my long-term care policy and the savings I have. Okay, so that's fair. That's a fair threshold. Those are the kind of thresholds, and those are conversations only you can have with your family. It's not a threshold I can create for you, right? You have to determine what's right for you. But I encourage people to consider other options. A lot of people got very nervous because of COVID with assisted living communities. I'll tell you, I saw more people having issues with COVID in their home with caregivers who were coming in and out of their home than people who were living in assisted living, because the assisted livings were being regulated and they were testing. And in fact, they got the tests before everybody else did. They were testing all residents and managing. And you don't, when you have caregivers coming in, especially if you have a lot of caregivers coming in and out of the house, and those caregivers go to other clients, right? Most caregivers, if they're only spending 12 hours a week with you, they're working full time. So they're working with somebody else. You don't know who else they're going to, and you can't control what they do outside of your home. So it's something to consider when, the next pandemic, God forbid, knock wood when I say that, but those are things to consider. That was a big wake-up call for us in this business, is the vulnerability of folks who were in their home and having people coming into their home, and what we needed to do to protect. And so, there's a lot more control in a setting like an assisted living community. So let's talk about these different communities. So you've got independent living, you've got assisted living, skilled nursing, and memory care. We're going to talk about those. The bottom is called the continuing care retirement communities, and that is a special situation that it's a place that has all 4 levels there on site, on campus. So they have independent living, they have assisted living, they have the ability to do skilled nursing, and they have the ability to do memory care all in one entity. And there are a few. California's got a few of them. There are some real pluses to that model, but we'll dive in a little. Okay, so the first thing we need to do before we talk about what entity is going to make sense, you need to look at what are the needs, right? So, and I can tell you in everything I've done in my experience, I've been doing this since 2005, and I can count on one hand somebody who needed skilled nursing care. They needed medical care because they had a trach, because they had, because of what the needs were. Most people don't need medical care. They need non-medical care. So the medical care would be injections, IV fluids, think more hospital type things, right? It's also your PT, your physical therapy, speech therapy, but you can get that to come in, right? So it doesn't have to be in-house. You can get home health services to come in. So medical needs, that's what we're talking about. The injections, or sometimes people will call it skilled needs, right? You don't want somebody giving you an injection who doesn't know how to give you an injection. Non-medical, those are the things most of the people need as we age. So your assistance with activities of daily living. And these are the things that will trigger your long-term care policy. So needing help with bathing, dressing, grooming, eating, not meal preparation, but actually putting the spoon to your mouth, eating, ambulating, toileting, and transferring, which is standing up in and out of a chair or in and out of bed. And then there's the secondary needs, which are called instrumental activities of daily living, and long-term care policies don't care about these. They don't even want you to mention them. That's the meal preparation, the money management, shopping, light housework, medication management, which oddly enough I don't have on here. And oddly enough should be an activity of daily living because it's important to have your medications. But it's all the sort of socialization, outings, things like that. So determining what is what is medical versus non-medical, that's going to be the first thing we look at in terms of where would be the right place for someone. And then we start talking, independent living, let's just talk about independent living. Independent living is you move into an environment that is you don't have to mow the lawn anymore. Most independent living communities also do assisted living. So you have your own apartment. They provide meals. They'll take housekeeping once a week. You get the benefits of activities, and they also provide transportation. So they will provide certain things, but it's a lot of people just decide when they want to move, when they get to a point where they don't want to have to worry about mowing the lawn anymore or taking care of the garden or the housework. They just decide to move to independent living. And if you move to independent living, then it's easier down the road for them to bring in a caregiver once in a while when you need one. That's actually a real advantage because with assisted living, if you're bringing a caregiver into your home to help with bathing a few times a week, there's going to be minimum shifts, right? Because they're traveling to you. I mean, we all know what Southern California traffic is. it's going to take a while to get to you. So most people will do a minimum shift of like 4 or 5 hours per day, per shift at home. Well, you probably don't need that much time. That's what my uncle's been saying. He's like, I don't want somebody hovering over us for 5 hours. Well, then let's move into assisted living and they can pop in your room for 5 minutes and then leave you alone. Like, doesn't that make more sense? To me, it makes more sense. I'm an introvert. I don't want somebody hovering in my house for 5 hours if I don't need them to do something. But I could have my own apartment. They could pop in to help me with what I need and then hop back out. So those are options as well. So assisted living is when only a custodial care or non-medical care is needed. They range anywhere from $3,500 to $20,000 a month. That's a huge range, I know, but there are some really fancy ones. And they also, some of them have, the $20,000 a month is actually because somebody, it's a very fancy one and they need one-on-one care. I will tell you personally, if you're spending $20,000 a month in assisted living, you're in the wrong place. You really need more one-on-one attention, and that would probably be better served in a boarding care. So boarding cares down at the bottom there, here, they range from $3,000 to $9,000, and they're homes, they're houses that have been converted. Some people call them a six-pack because maybe they're like 6 beds, right? Your ratio, your staff to resident ratio is much better. It's like 3 to 1, 2 to 1. So if you need more attention, you can get it at a boarding care, whereas an assisted living community, which is quite large, your staff ratio is going to be more like 7 to 1. They can't give you the kind of one-on-one attention that you could get in a boarding care. So that's when I always say to take a look at, you know, $20,000 in a assisted living is not appropriate, as far as I'm concerned. My own opinion. You can get, there are some places that will do shared rooms. Those are happening less and less with strangers because most people don't want to live with a stranger. However, couples can go in together, and that's not considered a shared room, it's considered a couple. And some places will charge you for both people. Some places will charge you for the one person, and then they add a couple $1,000s more since there's a second person. And then let's talk about skilled nursing. So skilled nursing, now skilled nursing, there's short-term skilled nursing, which a lot of us will use. If you have surgery and you need to get some intensive rehab, that you go to short-term skilled nursing. And that's actually covered by insurance. Up to, Medicare covers up to 100 days. And it's the first 20 days are 100%. And then after that, it is 80%, but your supplemental plan should cover the rest. So those are, that's not what we're talking about regarding long-term care. That's for people who are just need a short-term stay in skilled nursing that would be covered by insurance. If you require skilled nursing ongoing because you are on a ventilator or you are trying to think of what else, a lot of times folks think complications because of Parkinson's, or there are certain conditions that might make things more complicated and require skilled nursing. So that starts at $11,000 a month for shared and up to $17,000 a month for private. And these amounts I got from a few different sources, which are listed in the back of the presentation. The California Nursing Home Center for Nursing Home Reform was one, and I think caring.com was the other one. Now, skilled nursing is the only thing that is covered by Medi-Cal. Medi-Cal is California's version of Medicaid, and it is a welfare program. And we're going to talk a little bit about it in a few minutes. Medi-Cal does pay a certain amount of hours of caregiving, and they will pay for a certain amount, and they will pay for if you need more than just a caregiver coming to your home a few hours a day, they will actually pay for skilled nursing ongoing. It's called long-term custodial care. And you have to be eligible for Medi-Cal for it. As I said, Medi-Cal is a welfare program, and after death, Medi-Cal will recoup any money from the estate. So it's not a get out of jail free card. It's not like, oh, let's use Medi-Cal so we don't have to pay for caregiving. No, it doesn't work that way. An interesting thing is there is a program, Medi-Cal started a program in California called the Assisted Living Waiver Program, where they will actually let you go to certain assisted living communities instead of being in a skilled nursing facility, just because it's cheaper for them. But if that's something that you're capable of. So memory care is the next one, and memory care, that's when cognitive impairment requires a higher level of care. Regular assisted living cannot, if you have a diagnosis of dementia, a regular assisted living community cannot take you unless they are licensed to provide dementia care. So a lot of the assisted living communities have gotten that license, and they have like a memory care wing, so to speak. And that ranges anywhere from $7,000 to $15,000 a month, by the way. These are all monthly charges. And so the next one I'm going to talk about is the continuing care. And the reason I like the continuing care is because it's good for a few reasons. If you're a couple, you could both be in the same community and get differing needs met. I look at my aunt and my uncle. My aunt has dementia, and my uncle cognitively is fine, except for the fact that he's incredibly stressed from being her caregiver. But he has some physical limitations. He was a veteran, so he has some challenges physically. So I find oftentimes with couples, one person in the couple will have cognitive needs, and the other person in the couple might have physical needs. Or one person is fine and healthy and completely independent, and one needs help with something. And so a place like a continuing care retirement community is able to meet both those needs. So it's something. So it also, something that I really like is they offer a long-term contract. Some of them do. Well, to truly be a CCRC, they need to offer a long-term contract. Some also will allow you to go month to month. The long-term contract is one that you enter, I call it a buy-in. You pay $300,000, somewhere between, I think, $250,000 to $700,000 at the onset, and then you pay a monthly charge. And what that does is it buys you into their service, and by law, they can never kick you out, even if you run out of money. So depending on what financially how you're set, that could be something that would guarantee care for the rest of your life. Now, I wouldn't recommend somebody who's 90 going into a CCRC and paying that buy-in, right? That's good for somebody who's going into their independent living. So I actually know somebody who lives in a CCRC. It was 55 and over, right? So soon after she turned, I think she was like 57, I worked with her, and she actually was tired of having a house, and she knew the system, and she knew, so she went ahead and got in early. She was one of the younger people there, but she was driving her car back and forth, doing her thing. She was still working and living at a CCRC. And she will live there for the rest of her life. So that works for her. So I always say, you do you. All right. So this is about aging life. So this is what I do, is aging as an aging life care manager, is help people figure out what's a good decision for them. There is a website on the last, it's aginglifecare.com, I think it is, or .org. It's on the last slide. That you can do a search for find somebody near you, and they can help you kind of talk through some of these decisions. So one of the things that I wanted to add, just sort of as I wrap up my side of it, how am I doing here? Oh, yes, is post-COVID world thoughts. So I already talked a little bit about this. The struggle with having caregivers and staff, one thing we realized is that you can't dictate what they're doing outside of the time they spend with you, which makes you very vulnerable. So looking at the safety, and I say this just because I heard from so many people during COVID that they would never move into assisted living because of fears of something like that. And I found just the opposite. I found that there were more problems for folks that were at home with caregivers than there were for people who were living in communities. The necessity of a backup plan, that was huge during COVID. We learned that the hard way. A lot of people ended up moving back in with their families during that period of time because that was the only way, maybe their daughter and son were working from home, and so they could move in because they couldn't get caregivers to come. The one thing that did come up were restrictions of visitation in communities, and that's very real. That's a real issue. Now, hopefully, they've all figured it out because that was new. They hadn't thought of that before. I advise people when they go touring places, ask, do you have an outdoor space? Because that was the great thing. Everyone who had an outdoor space, they were able to modify visitation, right? They were able to section off, you could schedule, make appointments, and you could be with your loved one outside or what have you. Thankfully, we're in Southern California. We have good weather even in the winter. And so that's a good question to be asking these places and hold them accountable for it. And the importance of creativity. I can tell you there were many people I went to see through a window for family members who lived far away because they wanted eyes on. So there are ways to work around whatever they throw our way. We'll come up with a new plan. So let's see. So this is the Medi-Cal. So Medi-Cal is a real game changer now. Again, I'm going to reiterate, it is a welfare program. So if you get Medi-Cal, upon your death, Medi-Cal will go after recouping its losses from your estate. So it is not a way to get away with anything. But for people who need Medi-Cal, we've had some bright news. It used to be that Medi-Cal, you had to have less than, so Medi-Cal looks for Medi-Cal to be eligible for Medi-Cal, they look at two things. They look at assets and they look at income. In California, we've always been a little lucky because income, there was a threshold. I think right now the threshold's like $1,500 for a single person, monthly income. So that means they're living on their Social Security. But if they have a little bit extra, they can still qualify for Medi-Cal, but it's a paid, they have to pay into it. So it's not free Medi-Cal. If you make under $1,500, it's free Medi-Cal. If it's over $1,500, then you pay what's called a share of cost, which still ends up being, if you need help, that still ends up being a benefit. The asset was usually the issue. The asset threshold had been $2,000 up until last July. So you could not apply for Medi-Cal until your assets were under $2,000. They did not look at a house. They did not, if you were living in it, they did not look at the car you were driving. But if anyone paid you rent to live in the house with you or anything like that, you wouldn't qualify. So the asset change that happened in July 2022 is now $130,000 for one person. And for a second person in the house, like if there's a spouse in the house, then it's an extra $65,000. Now, that actually opens up the doors for a lot of people who were not able to qualify for Medi-Cal right off the bat, but we're trying to do creative things to spend down money in order to qualify. So now there are, if that was ever something you had considered and you were talking about spending down assets in order to qualify for Medi-Cal or for someone that you love, reconsider it, because it's a game changer. A lot of people now are qualifying that didn't qualify before. But as I said, Medi-Cal will go after the estate afterwards. And actually the asset limit's going to go completely away in 2024. But I kind of wonder if Medi-Cal's trying to trick people. Because think about it, and then when you die, they're going to go after your assets. It's like, I'm like, are they thinking people aren't going to pay attention? Like, why are they doing that? I haven't figured that out yet, but that's the deal. So again, remember, limited resources. So the downsides to Medi-Cal, not just that they're going to recoup your money, there aren't a lot of Medi-Cal beds available in long-term care. So it's already hard to find a bed for somebody in long-term care for someone with Medi-Cal. It's already hard. Think about all these more people getting on board. It's just going to make it even harder. So the resources are limited. The quality of care is not always great in the facilities that accept long-term care Medi-Cal benefits. And then, of course, the recouping the losses. So those are the downsides. And I'm done.
Thanks, Sylvia. Good morning, everyone. So for my portion, I'm going to be talking about how long-term care insurance fits into overall planning for potential long-term care expenses. As I said, potential, and this is one of the challenges in planning for this area, because insurance, whether it's long-term care insurance, life insurance, disability, right? Insurance is all about managing risk, right? The risk that something may happen. And so what insurance does is really shifting some type of risk that you're currently shouldering onto the third party, right? So that if something happens, they will provide benefits, right? So with long-term care, it's a challenge because of a number of factors, right? One is the unpredictability about it. One is whether or not you're even going to need long-term care. Statistically, it's going to show that most of us will need it at some level down the road. But, as Sylvia mentioned, there's a lot of different levels of care required, from minimal to extensive, right? And there's a price tag that goes along with that. The other variable is the duration, right? So if somebody needs long-term care, for how long? Maybe a very short amount of time, they potentially could recover, or maybe they would pass away after that. Or in the case of, let's say, somebody who has something like Alzheimer's, right, that duration could go on for years, right? And so because of all of that variation, it's very tough to, or it's a challenge to plan for those potential expenses. Not only long-term care can entail physical type of issues that require assistance, but also, as we talked about, cognitive impairment issues, right, as well, right? So if somebody develops some type of cognitive impairment, they may require additional supervision, right? And that would fall into a long-term care situation. So it's a challenge. The other thing, and Sylvia started her presentation talking about it as far as, as far as human nature, planning for long-term care or thinking about that, it's easy to ignore. Either people want to not think about it, maybe bury their head in the sand, and then an event may occur, right? And then they're going to be forced to deal with it. So in a lot of cases, when these long-term care issues come about, right, we look to family and family members, right? Usually a spouse will step into there's a loose screw in here in the mic. So yeah, healthy spouse usually will step in healthy. I mentioned that. Or family members, right? Children often play the role as caregivers as parents age. Have we empowered those who will step in? And we'll talk about that. It's mainly kind of legal type of issues, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So okay. So this next slide is really just summarizing all of the numbers that Sylvia went over in her presentation. So kind of put it all together so you can see it laid out, and you can take a look at the different ranges of costs based upon the level of care required. So up at the top, it's starting at an hourly rate, $36, moving down to assisted living or custodial care, and then down at the bottom, we're looking at skilled nursing homes and memory care facilities. So if you look at that one column where it says cost per month, you can sort of eyeball that, and obviously just, minimal hours per week is probably going to be on the low end. Assisted living is more the mid-range, and then nursing home, memory care facilities are going to be the most expensive. So, if you were to try to sort of estimate a range of potential costs from low to high, I came up with maybe $3,000 a month to $12,000 a month, depending on the level of care that somebody might need. Now, you could see that's a pretty wide range of potential costs, right? If someone's going to need long-term care, at an average, I came up with about $7,500 a month. If you annualize that, that's going to come out to about $90,000 a year. Okay, that's today. Now, the average age when people may need long-term care is probably going to be right around age 80, give or take, right? There's different studies and surveys. So, someone who's 60 years old today potentially may not need long-term care for another 20 years, all right? So now inflation has been in the news the last few years, so long-term care costs are no different. And so if you were to inflate that, let's say over 20 years, and again, just using like 3% inflation, I did some math on that. That $90,000 a year comes up to about $163,000. Average stay in a nursing home is a little less than 3 years, right? So if you multiply that by 3 years, roughly in 20 years, right, kind of an average level of long-term care exposure or need is about $500,000, right? So again, that's sort of right, kind of in the middle, right? It could be lower, it could be a lot higher, right? Depending on what we're talking about. So that's really the planning exposure that everyone has to sort of think about, right? And again, it's challenging because you may never even need long-term care, right? Let alone, what level might you need. So that's really the challenge, and so we'll talk about that some more. So generally, what's the initial thing that people are going to do is do a personal appraisal or their family appraisal on, what kind of resources are available in the event of a long-term care need. So in terms of financial, right, taking a look at the different income sources, whether there's a pension, Social Security benefits, retirement portfolios or other assets. There's just some listed here. Somebody's home, along with retirement accounts, investment assets. And then in terms of more of the human component, right, family members, right, does it make sense? Are they willing and able to step in as potential caregivers, right? And then also from the legal standpoint, I mentioned this earlier as far as empowering the people that might step in, right, are documents such as powers of attorney, health directives, in place, whether people are named trustees of certain assets, et cetera. So the legal planning also kind of goes hand in hand with planning for long-term care situations as well. So what are the options when it comes to looking at long-term care expenses and how you may want to pay for those? So, we just talked about this personal assessment. Now, I put on the slide a term called self-funding, right? So, and that's really sort of the default strategy for long-term care planning. If you don't do anything else, is you're going to self-fund. So if someone needs long-term care and the bills start coming in, you're going to take out your checkbook and start writing checks. You may sell assets from a retirement account or investment account. Potentially, you can use your home as an asset that could potentially provide resources to cover long-term care costs. So self-funding is obviously one approach. It's the default approach. And then some using insurance strategies. The next one is called traditional long-term care insurance. That may be the one that most people are familiar with if they are familiar with long-term care insurance policies. And we're going to kind of talk about traditional policies versus these other ones a little bit. Typically have a little stricter underwriting. Premiums tend to be level and recurring, and you would determine the amount of coverage based upon some daily benefit amount or a monthly benefit amount limit. Now, traditional policies typically will provide you more flexibility in structuring the type of coverage and the level of coverage than some of these other options that we're going to talk about. That's traditional. The next option is what's called hybrid policies, which provides long-term care benefits using life insurance policy or an annuity. Sometimes they're called asset-based policies as well, but the hybrids, you also have to go through medical underwriting, although it may be a little less strict than traditional. Typically, these hybrid policies come with more larger upfront premiums, either a single premium or at least more upfront in the early years. They also come with potential liquidity and death benefit features that you don't see with traditional policies. And we're going to kind of be comparing and contrasting these in a little bit. Now, before I talk about some of the other options, you noticed I put self-funding as far as the initial one. And one of the things that I've noticed from talking to people over the years about long-term care insurance is, and it could be something like, well, have you thought about long-term care insurance, et cetera? And it's like, well, no, I'm going to take care of that myself, right? So we're talking about self-funding. So the implication is that these strategies may be all sort of mutually exclusive. So you either self-fund and pay everything yourself as opposed to getting a policy, right? So in my mind, I think there's actually three types of approaches. One is, yes, you could self-fund 100%. That's probably on one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum is you could try to insure potential costs as much as you can, right? So insuring 100% or close to it. But then I think the third one is probably using some combination, right, of getting insurance, but also self-funding. So there's really kind of a spectrum of approaches, right, where you can pay for it all yourself or try to pay for it all yourself versus using some kind of combination of insurance policy along with self-funding some of those costs as well. So one of the reasons why I say self-funding as opposed to self-insuring, right, because some people say, well, I'm going to self-insure long-term care, is that what you don't get by self-funding is what I call a leverage advantage with insurance, in that if you were to self-fund your long-term care expenses, you'd be taking $1 or writing a check for $1 to cover $1 of long-term care expenses, right? One for one. With a long-term care insurance policy, typically you're going to get some leverage, so in that $1 of premium that you pay may end up getting you $2, $3, or even more of long-term care benefits, right? So there's a definite leverage factor by using insurance. So another variation of life insurance with long-term care provisions, and they are different policies, is where it's really a life insurance policy by itself, but it has some optional long-term care benefits that go along with it. But with these policies, life insurance and the death benefit is really a priority. The long-term care benefits is secondary, right? So those are out there. They're potentially a strategy, but in terms of strategies with long-term care planning as a priority, we'll be talking about just the traditional and the hybrids that I mentioned earlier. And then finally, there's the government options, which Sylvia talked about using Medi-Cal, and also veterans assistance. There's some limited benefits there, as well as Medicare, very limited as well. So as far as what long-term care insurance really is, long-term care insurance is going to cover the types of care that your other types of insurance normally don't cover, right? Health insurance, Medicare insurance, or if you have a Medicare supplement, right? Those types of policies are typically not going to cover costs associated with long-term care, right? So Sylvia talked about what that can entail earlier, right? Whether it's through home health care, assisted living at a nursing home. Long-term care insurance also covers costs for adult daycare, respite care, hospice care. And you had mentioned the instrumental activities, daily living. In California, long-term care policies will cover those instrumental activities of daily living as well. Those are the cooking, cleaning, transportation, et cetera. So when the policies kick in, or when you're able to claim benefits, it's really going to be when somebody is unable to perform 2 out of the 6 activities of daily living that we talked about earlier, as well as if somebody has cognitive impairment, right, and they're determined to need additional supervision, right, that could also trigger benefits as well.
Can I add something?
Sure.
So with the dementia, it's even if somebody is able to get themselves dressed, but they need prompting, that's when you would argue with your long-term care company that you should trigger the policy, that you should trigger the claim, because if they're not prompted to do it, even though physically they're doing it themselves, but because of the dementia, they're not either remembering or they're not putting the right clothing on, they're requiring assistance. So that sometimes people wait too long to trigger the policy because they think, well, they're still getting dressed themselves. But if the memory impairment is causing them to need that prompt.
So this next slide talks about the kind of structure of the components of a long-term care policy. So I've listed out some of the main ones. This is not all-inclusive, but these are kind of the primary choices that you're going to have to make, or options. And all of these listed have an impact on how much that policy is going to cost, right? So as each of these areas, as the amounts are increased or they're decreased, that's going to have an effect on the price. Okay, so let's go through these. So the first decision or type of policy you're going to have to choose from is a reimbursement policy versus an indemnity policy. Reimbursement policy is just kind of what it sounds like, right? The policy will reimburse the policy holder for any expenses that are incurred, right? So if somebody has a $6,000 a month bill from an assisted living facility, right, then the policy will reimburse that. An indemnity policy is different in that it doesn't require any expenses to be submitted for reimbursement. The policy will pay out a set amount in cash, right, based upon the policy level. So if you have an indemnity policy for $6,000 a month, once the coverage is enabled, where somebody is unable to perform the activities of daily living, right, the policyholder will receive $6,000 a month in cash that they could use to spend on whatever they want. They could pay the bills for the long-term care or anything else, right? One thing that comes up a lot are when family members serve as caregivers, and let's say maybe they quit their job or take a leave of absence to serve as a caregiver, right? Reimbursement policies on long-term care policies will typically require the caregiver to be a licensed caregiver before they would reimburse expenses. So family members typically can't get paid under a reimbursable policy. With an indemnity policy, that money could be used to pay family caregivers. So that's one choice you'll be making. The other feature or structure of a policy is the benefit period and the amount. This is going to determine what the policy coverage levels are going to be. So again, typically they're going to take some form as a daily benefit or a monthly benefit. So in my example, I have $4,000 a month with a 3-year benefit period. So if you do the math, at $48,000 a year times 3-year benefit period, that comes out to $144,000, which is really a benefit pool of long-term care benefits that are available to be paid out. That doesn't mean the benefits will only last for 3 years. It will only last for 3 years if the maximum amount of payments are made during that time frame. So just for example, if $4,000 a month is the maximum benefit and somebody starting out only incurs $2,500 of long-term care expenses, they can use that benefit pool for much longer than 3 years, as long as the costs don't go up. But the $4,000 is really going to be the maximum. So if somebody incurs $6,000 of expenses in a month, the policy will only pay out $4,000 because that's a monthly benefit. The elimination period, which is really kind of akin to a deductible in other types of insurance policies, that's the amount of time that once the policy, somebody qualifies for benefits, they're going to have to wait and cover their own costs before the policy will start paying benefits. So just for example, if a policy had a 90-day elimination period, right, and somebody is no longer able to perform the 2 out of the 6 activities, daily living, and doctor signs off on that, that's when the elimination period starts to begin, the clock starts ticking. Now, there are 2 ways to calculate elimination period. So you want to check the policy that you're contemplating or that you have, right? There's a calendar day elimination period versus a care day elimination period. Calendar day is going to favor the policyholder because you can fulfill the elimination period much quicker, right? So if the elimination period started on July 1st, right, in 90 days, then benefits would start coming in. Now, if it's based on care days, and let's say somebody's getting care maybe twice a week or something like that, well, it's going to take much longer than 3 calendar months for them to meet that elimination period. So that's something you want to be aware of when you're looking at policies, or if you have one already, to just double check that. Inflation protection is another potential option that you can get with long-term care policies, and you know, in my mind, I think it's a very important thing to consider. Now, there's a cost to that. You know, getting inflation protection, right? They come in different forms. Inflation could be compounded. It could be simple inflation per year, whether it's 3%, 5%, 2%, et cetera, right? And again, the more protection, right, 5% inflation protection is going to be much more expensive than getting 3% inflation protection. All right. So, but again, it's another choice you have to make, and again, those choices will determine the cost of the policy. And then there's optional riders, right? And again, this is just sort of scratching the surface. There's a lot of different sort of choices you can make, but I mentioned shared care, which on some policies, if let's say for a couple, husband and wife, they each have their own coverage, that if one person is needing long-term care and they use up their coverage, right, a shared care option enables the one spouse to tap into the other spouse's coverage for their benefit, right? So it provides some flexibility as well, right? That's an optional feature and also has a cost that comes associated with it. So again, there's a lot of kind of moving pieces and choices you'll make, and all of that will help determine what the actual cost of the policy is going to be. So I had mentioned that I'm just going to kind of focus on traditional and hybrid policies because those are kind of the 2 main ones. So let's kind of go through these. One, and I listed out some scenarios and features. The first 3 are 3 different scenarios. So one is if somebody needs long-term care, right? Well, under both policies, that benefit pool is going to be available for them. The next one is if somebody never needs long-term care. Let's say they live a healthy life and they pass away and never needing long-term care at all. Under a traditional long-term care policy, there's no death benefit that's provided, right? Under a hybrid long-term care policy, there is a death benefit feature that's provided. Typically, the amount of death benefits is going to be equal to the amount of premiums that are put in. So under these policies, right, the policyholder would name a beneficiary, whether it's their family members, could be Torrance Memorial, right? Another great choice. So those do have a death benefit. And then the third one, under change your mind, that's the scenario where somebody says, well, at some point I no longer want or feel I no longer need this policy, so I don't want it anymore. If you have a traditional policy, you really don't have any return of premium feature, right? You've paid the premiums, you've had the peace of mind for it. Under the hybrid policy, there is a return of premium feature. So typically you can get some or all of your premium back. So some of these next ones that I've shown here are just some of the differences, right? So I talked about reimbursement or indemnity, right? Under traditional policies, they're going to be reimbursement only. Hybrid policies, again, depending on the policy, will let you choose from either reimbursement or indemnity. I talked about shared care as far as, let's say, husband and wife sharing the benefits between themselves, only available on traditional, not available on hybrid type policies. We talked about the premium timing. So traditional policies tend to have level premiums or lower in the initial years. Hybrid policies are going to be more front-loaded, where you're going to pay a single premium or maybe pay it over the first 10 years. So from a cash flow standpoint, it's going to be more upfront. The premiums are going to be higher. And then premium increases are possible with traditional policies. The carriers reserve the right to submit for rate increases with the state departments of insurance. They're structured not to have price increases, but they can happen. Hybrid policies do not have price increases. You lock in the coverage for the premium out when you get the policies. So again, one is not better than the other. They're just different. It's ultimately going to depend on what your priorities are and what your situation is going to be. And then finally, when should you consider long-term care insurance, right? In my mind, I think the optimal time to consider a long-term care insurance policy, if you're, seriously considering it, it's probably going to be in somebody's 50s, age 50s, or early 60s. Here's some of the factors. One is premiums increase as you get older. Just like with life insurance, the older you get, the premiums are going to be higher. Number two, it requires medical underwriting, right? So when you're younger, most people are going to be in better health. As they get older, people develop issues that may result in them being declined or having it be more expensive. And then just in general, the cost of these benefits are increasing, right? So inflation protection is going up, right? A number of years back, quoting 5% inflation was pretty typical. Now with the cost of everything, maybe be quoting a lower inflation rate like 3%. Same thing with benefit periods. So the cost of the benefits are going up. So, in the end, 50s to 60s is probably the optimal time when you want to consider it. That's not to say that it may not be available as you get older, closer to 70, but it will be much more expensive. And again, the risk of developing something that would ultimately decline you on an application is going to be much greater as you get older. I think in my experience, all of the potential clients or prospects that either were declined or were told they wouldn't qualify were all in their 60s. So. Oh, one thing that I did want to mention, and it's listed in the handouts at the end, is the California Department of Aging has a very good resource. It's called Taking Care of Tomorrow, a Consumer's Guide to Long-Term Care. So, next slide. Okay, here we go. So if you were to just Google that description, it'll come up, and you can take a look at it or download it. So with that.
I think this is working again. Oh, okay. This one's working, okay, I think. Okay, so. Okay, will the agencies require caregivers? That one's not, it's fading out again. Okay, so the question from Zoom is, will the agencies require caregivers to have a health check in addition to TB tests? Will the caregivers have basic emergency care and CPR training? So the first question is, will a health check in addition to a TB test? They're not required to have a health test. They are required to do TB test. You can check with your agencies to see what their policy on that is. I know during COVID, I actually worked for an agency that supplied caregivers, and this was not regulated, this was just our decision, is our caregivers had to do a screening before each shift to make sure that they weren't showing signs of possible COVID infection. So I don't know that, that hasn't been formalized, and there will be agencies that will do that, and I'm sure there will be agencies that don't. Will the caregivers have basic emergency care or CPR training? Most of them do not, because they're non-medical. However, some caregivers do have CPR training. Again, it's something that you would check with your agency, and if that's something that's important to you, then those would be the people that they would provide. Do you want to take one?
Okay, let's see, on a hybrid long-term care policy, how do we find an agent who specializes in long-term care insurance to pursue a new policy? Well, so yeah, all of these policies, hybrid or traditional, these are insurance policies, so they have to be offered through a licensed insurance agent. So in terms of finding one, many financial advisors, financial planners may offer them, not all of them. They'd have to be licensed. Some people that offer these do just these policies or just insurance. And so, I could certainly, help point you in the right direction. I mean, myself am licensed to offer these to, my clients as well. But again, you have to get them through somebody who's licensed, has an insurance license. But there's a lot of different sources for that, right? So we could talk more about that afterwards if you want.
So the question is, does Medicare ever cover the new I can't even read the word, technology? I don't know the answer to that because I don't know what the technology is you're inquiring about. I'm not sure, I can't answer that one. Does Medicare cover home care? So no, Medicare does not cover home care. It does cover certain home health visits by a nurse. Bathing can be one of those tasks, but they will only come out and do it if they will only come out and do bathing assistance if they're doing something else as well. They're not going to help you, they're not going to make a meal for you, the home health people. And so otherwise Medicare doesn't cover it. Now there are some Medicare Advantage plans that are starting to a trial to provide limited, like SCAN does it, and I think there are a couple that are starting a trial of short-term, like for 2 weeks after a hospitalization, providing very limited caregiving support. I've been told, and it was SCAN. It is very limited, and it's not going to be ongoing. It's just post-hospitalization. And can you have 1 or 2 hours a day with an employer model agency? Not in California, no. Not in Southern California, and that's just the reality of where we live and traffic. I don't know of any agency that will do a 2-hour shift. In fact, many agencies are balking at a 4 hours. It has to be more than 4 hours. And the other thing I didn't even mention, there is a shortage of caregivers in this country, and they've been talking about it for the last 15 years, that there was going to be a growing shortage of caregivers, and it has come to fruition. It is now very problematic to find consistent staff, certainly for the smaller hours. But part of it is the baby boomers are now requiring, it's a large population of people requiring more caregiving. And we have individuals that are choosing to drive for Uber as opposed to being caregivers. So there's a national shortage.
Looks like there's a lot of Medical questions.
Okay.
I thought I saw one that someone was asking about what the cost of a policy was, but I don't see that here.
Okay.
Did somebody ask that?
Here.
Yeah, so actually, that is a very common, well, the two kind of questions that come up a lot, or statements that come up is, what's a policy going to cost? The other thing that comes up quite a bit is long-term care policy, they're so expensive, I can't get one, right? And so, as I kind of mentioned in some of those earlier slides, right, there's a pretty wide range of policy costs, right? Because a lot of the factors are the amount of coverage, well, that's probably the biggest one, right? And when I talked about strategies, right, self-funding 100% or trying to insure 100%, those are kind of the two extremes, right? So there's a range, right? So if somebody said, I think I'm going to try to insure maybe 50% of a potential cost and try to self-fund the balance, right? That's obviously going to be a much less expensive policy than somebody says, I'm going to try to insure the 100% of the cost of a memory care if I need to go into it. So I do have some hypothetical numbers here, and this kind of goes into what I said earlier, where in terms of the sort of optimal time to take a look at these is probably in somebody's 50s going up to the early 60s. There is a cost of waiting, right? Just because I talked about how the prices go up. So what I did was a hypothetical. I took a 57-year-old couple, okay, husband and wife, and I used a monthly benefit of $6,000 a month, right? So if you remember on those slides, that was a little bit less than kind of the midpoint on the range of expenses, right? $3,000 to $12,000 a month, right? Depending on the level of care. So $6,000 is a little bit less than midway. So that's kind of assuming that could potentially cover about half the cost of a nursing home. It might cover a lot of the cost of an assisted living. And, depending on what the costs ultimately were, there'd be, self-funding would come into play. So a 57-year-old couple, $6,000 monthly benefit with a 3-year benefit period, right? That comes out to a total benefit pool of $216,000, right? So the premium on that, now the male premium would be $3,200 a year, female premium would be $5,400 a year. The total for the two of them would be $8,600 a year. So you notice the premiums for the male versus female are different. They used to have unisex underwriting, but several years ago, they switched over to separate underwriting. So premiums for women policyholders are going to be more expensive just because they live longer and they're the ones who most likely are going to need long-term care. So $8,600 per year. I also contrasted that with somebody who was age 62. So 62-year-old couple, same benefit level. Instead of $8,600 a year, it'd be $10,100 a year, which is a little less than 20% higher. I'd mentioned inflation is important. So under both of these policies, right, out of the gate, $216,000 per person. would be the coverage at age 80 with 3% inflation. If somebody got it at age 57, their benefit pool would be $426,000. If they waited until age 62, which meant they'd have fewer years to grow it, they'd only have $368,000 of total benefit pool at age 80. So again, this is sort of just a hypothetical set of numbers. In everyone's case, it's going to be different. Cost could be higher or lower depending on the level of coverage, the type of optional features that you're going to come to it. So in the end, I guess what I would say is if you're serious about looking at this, you want to look at it sooner rather than later. And again, work with a qualified insurance professional on this to help you navigate through your choices.
I think this one went dead again. Okay, so oxygen therapy, is this non-medical? Yeah, if you have a canister of oxygen that you carry along with you and you have the cannula in your nose, that's non-medical, that's fine. Caregivers can help with that. When someone moves into independent living or assisted living, if they have to change, it looks like this is regarding changing medical groups. So you don't necessarily have to change medical groups if you're in assisted living or independent living if you're still in the area. These places will have, most of them will transport you to your appointments within 10 or 15 miles away. So as long as you can keep your same physicians, as long as you are in the area. And then with the CCRCs, please explain why I wouldn't recommend someone for 90 years old to go. So I said that, to clarify, I wouldn't recommend you do the buy-in at 90 years old, that $250,000, because you're basically that money is worth putting in and investing if you think that you're going to run out of your money, right? At 90, do you really think you're going to run out of your money and put $200,000? You know what I'm saying? Like, you're kind of, by paying that buy-in, you're hedging your bets that I'm going to live long enough to get my money's worth. And the agency, the facility is, the community is banking that you're not going to live long enough to get your money's worth. So you're both kind of hedging bets. And if you're 90 years old, I don't tend to think that that's worth spending the $250,000, because it depends on how long you think you're going to live. Now, if you think you're going to live to be 110, I stand corrected. Go ahead.
See, I have a son on Medi-Cal. When I die, would it be best to leave his share of inheritance to his sister and have her dole the amount out to him over the years?
Can I add that? No, do not give it to his sister, because his sister's going to pay a penalty. That's going to be money that's seen as her money. You could create a special needs trust or a pooled trust, which are both ways to protect his assets. And that money is actually not in his name. It is set up in a trust. You can talk to one of the attorneys that are here. Eric can probably speak more on that. But that would protect his Medi-Cal status and any other benefits he gets. But the money would be earmarked for his needs only, and then you're not saddling your daughter with unnecessary inheritance costs, right? Okay, did that pretty well for not being an attorney. Can a caregiver refuse to be tested for COVID? Yes, they can. You cannot dictate. Now, agencies might have policies in place, but there are certain things you can't force employees to do. That was one of the issues that came up with during COVID, is that companies could not force caregivers to get vaccinated because they were employees, and there are certain things you can't demand of employees. And so if you're hiring, that would be a good question to be asking the agency, is what's their policy on that?
Now, I don't know the answer to this. Can you take pets with you to a six-pack or assisted living community?
Pets?
Yeah.
Yes, actually, some allow it. Actually, there are a lot of communities that welcome, if you have a cat and they're going to stay in the apartment, there'll be a pet fee, you know, just for like you would if you were renting an apartment, possible damage reimbursement, you know, a couple $100 or something. But a lot of them even accept dogs and welcome dogs in the communities. You can go into a lot of the places and you see little dogs running around. It's great fun. They're very welcoming. I think there's also a size limit as to the dog. So if you've got Great Danes, maybe not. But the cute little ones that run everywhere, they're awesome. Yeah. Okay.
Let's see. If I'm qualifying for Medi-Cal, there is a clawback. What if assets are in an irrevocable trust which were transferred just before applying for Medi-Cal? Is that a problem? Well, I know there's a look.
You got it?
Yeah, I know there's a look back period. So if this is saying that someone's transferring assets.
I would say talk to an attorney.
Yeah. But generally, right,
Yeah.
you can't transfer assets out to qualify for Medi-Cal if it's, yeah.
Medi-Cal has the right to look back 5 years. I think right now they're looking back about 3 years, but they are allowed to look back 5 years. So before you do anything with transferring assets, see an attorney that specializes in that. And then you have one there?
There's a long one.
Okay, let's do the long one.
My late husband was disabled from September 2018 to May 2019 when he was living in a nursing home. Since he was disabled, he had...
This means we've been talking too much.
Since he was disabled, he had Medi-Cal insurance to cover expenses. I was his caretaker and could not work. I am unemployed 2019 until now, no assets, and live with son in apartment. Will Medi-Cal send me a bill anytime or when I start work?
Oh, I think the question is whether they're going to come after the estate. So if he, that I would actually defer this to an attorney too, wouldn't you say, Eric? That's a good attorney question. There is some protection as the spouse, but you'd want to see an attorney regarding that. And then there is one more that was just really quick. If someone is on Medi-Cal, does it count against him or her if they have a long-term care policy? And I would think, Larry, correct me if I'm wrong, it's going to depend on what policy it is, right? Like the one that might be an issue would be the one that pays it out, the indemnity. That might cause an issue. So that would be something to talk to a financial planner about.
All right, thank you very much, Sylvia and Larry. Let's give them a round of applause. Hope you all enjoyed that and found some good information to take away with you. And if we didn't get to your question, I apologize for that. My contact information is here. You can send me an email directly for those on Zoom to send me an email directly so I know who to get back to on with an answer. Our presenters are usually really helpful with that if I send them questions after the fact, and they'll provide those answers. So we did have a number of handouts left. If you do want to take an additional one, they're on the table. As you go out, you can do that. Please take a couple minutes to complete the evaluation form. I always appreciate hearing your feedback. You can leave those on the table too as you leave when you go out the door. And we did record this webinar, so it will be posted on our website. I will, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'll email everyone whose email address I have with the link to that and when it is posted. So we do have one more seminar this year. It's on September 9, Saturday morning, and we have a panel with Karen Pryor, Greg Schill, and Matt Moore. They're going to talk about investing, real estate, reverse mortgage, and just provide a bunch of information about the various aspects of those things. So Greg is a financial planner. Matt Moore is a probate and trust specialist in real estate. And Karen Pryor is a reverse mortgage specialist. You met her earlier today.